Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. Welcome to the Islamic Resource Society's annual Indian Arrival Day lecture. This is actually our 20th edition of this lecture. We started in 1997. If you check until 2021, you'll get more than 20, but we didn't have about 5 or 6 events. So that will cause us to actually have our 20th one here this year. Because of the COVID, we have to improvise, we have to get with the times. Hence, we are having this lecture streaming live on Zoom, also on Facebook and YouTube. And we have a very interesting lecture today by our brother, Dr. Riza Mohammed. So, before or without any further ado, I would like to bring on our brother Yahya Ali from the TML Primary School to deliver our opening Quranic recitation. Brother Yahya.
Assalamu alaikum. So let's start one time, right?
Yes.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون وسواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Jazakallah khair. Wonderful recitation by our young brother Yahya Ali. So we're seeing TML is in good hand, Faraz. Very, very good. We'd like to continue, and we'd like to bring remarks on behalf of the Islamic Resource Society, our Amir, or acting Amir, Brother Kwesi Atiba. Let's welcome him, please.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. As-salatu was-salam ala rasulihil kareem. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu rasuluh. Amma ba'du fa'uzu billahi minna shaytanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Allah tells us in the Quran, He gives wisdom to whom He wills. And whoever has been given wisdom has certainly been given much good. And none will remember except those of understanding. On behalf of the Islamic Resource Society, I take this opportunity to thank all of you who are present at this occasion, this viral, we may call it, event, this lecture, commemorating the 176th anniversary of the first landing of Indians and particularly Indian Muslims to Trinidad and Tobago. That on the 30th of May, 1845, on coming on the ship, the Fat El Rozak. The indentureship of the Indians in the then colonies of Trinidad, British Guyana, Dutch Guyana, and a number of other islands in the Caribbean, and others, they certainly had the impact on the development of these countries. The colonial authorities were not very much interested or concerned about human development. What they were concerned about was the production of sugar, the production of rum, the production of molasses, because these were the main exports of the region going out to Europe. However, through much effort, the indentured laborers and their descendants have shared in the advancement of the nation that is now the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. And that is something to celebrate. It is worthy of celebration. However, the present pandemic demands that the activities are done differently from how we would have done it in the past, setting up in a nice, large location with quite a number of people. Things cannot take place the same way. In fact, today is the day that we are marking, but in Trinidad and Tobago, the holiday is tomorrow. And that holiday is going to be spent with a state of emergency and a curfew. Can't go into some of that stuff right now. That is not what we are here for. But as intelligent creatures of Allah, who we hope have been given the wisdom that Allah spoke about, we have a duty to use the lessons of the past to do better, to bring a better future for our own selves and for our descendants. So may Allah allow this lecture to be part of the effort that pushes us forward. We know that there is a lot of uncharted territory, but Allah has given us guidance in the Quran and in the example of his last messenger, Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. So this evening, we are talking about redefining our Islamic identity in a Caribbean culture. And we do so, we continue to face that 400-year pandemic of white supremacy. We have to keep recognizing that and acting to suit. Allah has given us a way of life, which he said is the best way of life for mankind, and the Quran as the final document of that way of life. We as Muslims have a different worldview, and we have to chart a course according to that understanding. So once again, thanks for all those who are here, those who will join us on Facebook and YouTube and all the other forms that we are dealing with. And as we go forward, let us do it in the way we should do it as Muslims. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam. Jazakallah khair. Thank you, Brother Kwesi, for those remarks. So, anybody familiar with IRS programs, we always have elements of entertainment or what we call edutainment. We entertain you, but we educate you through that entertainment. And we have with us today, we are very fortunate to have with us our brother Haji Said Hussein from the Ashja to deliver a qasida. Let's welcome him.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Malikul Mulk La Sharika Lahu Wahdahu La ilaha illahu Shams Tabriz kar Khuda talabi خوشبو کا لا الہ الا ہو، تیرے ہی نام سے ہر ابتدا ہے، تیرے ہی نام تک ہر انتہا ہے، تیری حمد و ثنا الحمدللہ کہ تو میرے محمد کا خدا ہے۔ اللہ 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 اللہ۔ یہ زمیں جب نہ تھی، یہ جہاں جب نہ تھا، یہ زمیں جب نہ تھی، یہ جہاں جب نہ تھا، چاند سورج نہ تھے، آسماں جب نہ تھا، چاند سورج نہ تھے، آسماں جب نہ تھا، راز حق بھی کسی پر آیا جب نہ تھا، راز حق بھی کسی پر آیا جب نہ تھا، تب نہ تھا کچھ یہاں، تب نہ تھا کچھ یہاں تا مگر تو ہی تو، اللہ 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 اللہ۔ لا الہ تیری شان شان شان، لا الہ تیری شان شان شان، لا الہ تیری شان، یا وحدہ تو خیال و تجسس تو ہی آرزو، آنکھ کی روشنی دل کی آواز تو، آنکھ کی روشنی دل کی آواز تو، تابی تو ہے بھی تو، تابی تو ہے بھی تو، ہوگا بھی تو ہی تو، اللہ 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 اللہ۔ پہنچ معراج میں عرش تک مصطفیٰ، پہنچ معراج میں عرش تک مصطفیٰ، جب نہ معبود و بندے میں پردہ رہا، جب نہ معبود و بندے میں پردہ رہا، تب ملائک نے آقا سے جھک کر کہا، تب ملائک نے آقا سے جھک کر کہا، ساری مخلوق میں، ساری مخلوق میں حق نما تو ہی تو، اللہ 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 اللہ۔ شکراً، السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ۔
Alaikum assalam. Jazakallah khair. I want to move off script here, short bit. Emmanuel, what your thought about that performance?
Very interesting. Very interesting. His voice is very smooth too. You know, I mean, much props to him.
You could just imagine that performance alongside the IRS drummers. Oh my goodness. Well, Chris, we have to bring back them drummers, boy. Oh gosh, boy. If it's me beating my desk here tonight. Very well. Thank you very much, our brother Said Hussain. All right. You're all getting a lot here tonight, you know. And you ain't getting nothing yet. We want to bring on our featured speaker. But before that, I just want to say that This event is being brought to you by the Islamic Resource Society in partnership with the Trinidad Muslim League. And this year, we have extended that partnership to the Caribbean Muslim Network. And our featured speaker is none other than Dr. Riza Mohammed, no stranger to the Muslim world. He is a product of our soil, not a Trini boy, grew up in Central, right? He resides in the UK, and he's the founder of the Caribbean Muslim Network. And anybody familiar with this organization would know the vast amount of work they do globally. So with that, I would like to introduce our featured speaker, Dr. Riza Mohammed, who is speaking about redefining our Islamic identity in a Caribbean culture. It's an academic paper, Let's welcome Dr. Riza.
Please unmute, Dr. Riza.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you very much, Brother Kwesi, for the invitation to, and Brother Imtima for the invitation to share some thoughts and ideas on this important topic of Islamic identity in the Caribbean culture. And, listening to Brother Saeed recite that Qasida, really it's an indication of the type of rich legacy that we have been able to inherit based upon our past experiences from different parts of the world. And the fact that we are all here on this Zoom meeting coming from with our ancestry coming from different parts of the world in one melting pot as such in the Caribbean is also an indication of the richness of what we have been able to we have come up with over the years. The question of identity is something which is really important, and it has come to the fore in not just in the Caribbean but in all parts of the world. We have seen the rise of far-right movements in different places. And we have seen, what some of these movements are doing to the detriment of people globally. And the question of identity, so therefore the question of identity is something really for us as Muslims to consider very carefully. When we think about our own identity as people in the Caribbean region, we think about where we came from. We think about our differences in our what constitutes who we are, and but really we need to, before we can really appreciate what are some of the key things about our Islamic identity in this Caribbean culture, we have to ask ourselves some basic questions. So we have to ask ourselves a question like, what constitutes an identity? What does it mean to have an Islamic identity? What does being Muslim, how does that shape your identity? Is there such a thing as a Caribbean Muslim identity? If it doesn't exist, then what then would be some of the key elements that would shape such an identity? What are some of the challenges that we as Muslims in the Caribbean, as people in the Caribbean, face in the Western context? What are some of the lessons that we can learn from our legacy? We may have, many of us who came, our forefathers who came to this part of the world, we did not come under voluntary. In fact, we were coerced to come. We were brought as slaves, or we were bought as indentured laborers, which is another way of, which is another form of enslavement. But so there are a lot of questions which are important for us to be able to answer, because if we can find answers for some of those, it will also help us to understand the type of identity that we have. In fact, another one to look at is the question of home. What do we consider to be our home? For many people, they are looking at themselves and saying, well, where is home really? Is home back where our forefathers used to live? Is home back in places like the subcontinent, or like Africa or Asia or the Far East? Where is home? And if it is that we do decide that home is in the Caribbean or as part of the larger Caribbean diaspora, then what is our role in terms of building that home, in terms of our civil and civic engagement? So there are a number of important questions that needs to be answered, and we can't answer all of those questions tonight, but maybe we can just sort of highlight some of the key areas. Now, when we think about Muslim presence in the Caribbean region, it has come in different historical periods. We've seen the periods of Arab explorers in the 8th century. Then we've gone through the colonial period between the 15th and 19th century with the African slave trade, followed by the Javanese and the indentured Indian laborers in the 1830s and 1840s and onwards. Then we've also seen migrants who were coming from the Middle East in the late 19th to early 20th century. And then we've seen quite a number of waves of people who have been coming to the Caribbean region as Muslims, or trying in some way to reassert themselves and as Muslims within the region. And added to that is the growing conversion of many people of African descent who were able to start to rediscover their roots from the 1960s onwards. So there has been a number of different ways in which people have found who identify themselves as Muslims have found themselves in the Caribbean region. And this is important for us to be able to understand in terms of who we are. Now, when we think about the question of identity, we need to realize that identity is something that is essential for all human beings. Really, we can consider it to be more or less an anchor, root. It gives you a sense of being, a sense of purpose. It sort of helps you to link yourself with your background, with your history, and it helps people to prepare themselves for the present and also for the future. So when we think about Islamic identity, just to come straight to the question is, what does Islam give to identity formation? Because that is important for us in this context. Does it mean being Muslim means that you can't be something else? You can't be, let's say, you can't identify yourself with the Caribbean, or you can't identify yourself with America or with any other country. What does it mean? Does it mean that you have to identify yourself with maybe something or someone or some place in the Middle East? Does it mean that it comes along with particular type of clothing that you wear? Is being a Muslim identity describes the food that you eat, or the way that you the type of language that you utilize? So these things are important for us to consider, because many people get caught up in terms of some of the other things which form the identity with what Islam really gives us. And what's important for us to go back to is to go back to the Quran and see how the Quran looks at the whole question of identity. Now, what the Quran does is that the Quran begins to tell you that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created all human beings. In the 49th chapter of the Quran, he talks about the concept of an-nas, which is the concept of people, that all people, that ya ayyuhan nas, inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha, that he has created you, that we have created you from a male and female. And that's really important, because it tells us about our common origin of all people. And what we see now in the world, and sometimes it rears its ugly head, even within the Caribbean region, especially during elections time, is when people raise these sort of differences of ethnicity to be for their own selfish usages in terms of trying to gain power. And this is something, but the Quran begins to tell us that really, I mean, if you think about yourself as people, that you are one, that you have a common ancestry. Your common ancestry is from one male and from one female. And we have made you into nations and tribes, لِتَعَارَفُوا, that you may know one another. So that the differences are there, but the differences are meant to not differentiate us and separate us, but meant to make us to be able to identify each other and bring us even closer together. And more importantly, what the Quran does, the Quran says that all of these things that you consider to be differences that you might have, whether it be based upon your language or the place that you live or the color of your skin or the amount of possessions that you might have, these differences means nothing in the eyes of the Creator himself. But really what matters is what the Quran describes as your sense of God consciousness, of how conscious you are about God and about your responsibilities to him and your responsibilities to humanity, and whether or not you are heeding his commands. And when we look into the Quran, what we would find is that perhaps one of the very first commands that the Quran gives us is when God talked to the angels about the idea of the human being on earth. That inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa. That God, when he was about to create the first human being, asks a simple, that I am going to create a being who needs to be the steward on earth, who needs to be my ambassador on earth, who needs to be there to be able to be a caretaker of this planet and of people and of everything that is there of his creation. And that's really important for us to be able to understand, because that gives us, in a sense, a perspective of why we're here. What is our rationale and reason for being here? So when we look back now at our history, and then we may think that our history of being here, that, you know, we may not like the circumstances of how we came here. What is important for us to recognize is that all of earth is God's home, is God's place, is God's creation. And therefore, your being here, knowing that you have been sent as his ambassador, as his caretaker for the earth, that you have a role and responsibility where you find yourself. You have found yourself here, therefore you have a role and responsibility to be able to make wherever you are into the best possible place, to be able to bring people together, be able to see the diversity as a way to be able to bring people together rather than keeping them apart. And that's something important for us to be able to consider. So it's not one about trying to get rid of people's ancestry, but it's about a celebration of their ancestry, of what they are, but to be able to contextualize it, to know that why we are here is about building a society of people who may well have differences, but we are trying to utilize that for our benefit, to be able to use that for the betterment of everyone. And for this, we look at the model in which the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace, gave us. And this was the model of the Medinan society. When he was alive in his society in Medina at the time, Medina at the time was a society very similar to the Trinidadian society or to Caribbean society. It was one that was multicultural. It was one that was multi-religious. It was one that had people from different ethnicities, people who resided from different parts of the world. It was one where people had differences among themselves. It was one where people, even in terms of people's social status, economic status, it was one, they were the rich and they were the poor. There were people who were who did not did not work towards, let's say, the state, and then there were others who wanted to contribute towards it. So you had a myriad of people, different types of people in that society. But yet all that he was trying to do was and he taught us how to be able to bring all of these people who in the beginning were warring factions, people who were just fighting each other, and bring them together so that they can learn to live with each other, and they can learn to live for a higher purpose and meaning in life. And that was his goal, and that was his mission that he had with him throughout his life. And not only did Medina become a model, for its own people, but it became a model for the rest of the Arabian Peninsula and for generations since then, all over the world. And that's something for us to be able to consider. And therefore, when we think about what we have in the Caribbean region, as we have come together now, what I think the Caribbean gives us more than anything else is that it allows us to be able to develop, in a sense, a different mindset, a mindset in the environment that we find ourselves. And when people are able to, when people are able to know each other, we're able to talk to each other, we're able to communicate with each other, spend time to live with each other, then they can truly understand each other and realize that the differences that we might have, are not differences that should separate us, but rather they should bring us together. And so we see in our country, it's where we can sit down and have a meal and have a variety and a mixture of different types of food from different parts of the world and celebrate in that diversity. And that is something important. We can see that when we lined up for prayer in our mosques in the country, where we have people who, we don't ask the person next to us, where did you come from? Who are you? What's the color of your skin? But we line up knowing that we are all equal, going before the Creator himself. And that is the beauty of what Islam brings. And that is something that we need to be able to celebrate and to be able to share with those. And this is especially more so a message that we need to bring to the Caribbean, especially in light of the rise of far-right movements, the rise of fascists, of extremists, of, for instance, even within India, where a lot of our forefathers came from, we see the rise of groups, extremists, fascist movements, Hindu fundamentalist movements like the RSS, which is creating havoc for people. Just before this Zoom meeting, I was just having a discussion with my colleagues from India who was scared even about the idea of going back home, thinking that what has India become in terms of what the government is trying to do in looking at the way that minorities are being treated, the laws which have been enacted. And therefore, we in the Caribbean can be a beacon of light, not just for ourselves, but for the world. We need to be able to export the type of fraternity and the type that we have been able to build in the Caribbean region for the betterment of the Caribbean region as a whole, but also for the betterment of the world, of even some of the countries that we might consider to be our home, or the countries of our forefathers. And that is something important for us to be able to consider. We need to go above and beyond what we are. And I believe that we are in a position now to begin to share, what we have with the rest of the world, because we have lived through so much different types of experiences. And through those experiences, we have matured, and we have matured as a people who are not just Muslims, but as a nation of people coming from different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different religions. And that is something that we should celebrate. And that is something that, in a sense, we should export to the rest of the world, inshallah. So these are some of the points I wanted to bring to our attention. And the key point I would leave with is that one of the key things that the Prophet fought against, that he was very much strong against and fighting against, was something which was known as tribal loyalty. Tribal loyalty, the Arabic term was asabiya, and that became the root of communal strife, you know, that sort of separated people. And this type of tribal loyalty to all sorts of different type of you know, of man-made ideologies is something you see that is taking root in different parts of the world and creating havoc. And that is something, as a Caribbean people, we can do much to be able to fight against, and to be able to see how we can change the status quo and bring people together and create a type of social cohesion that is required at a Caribbean and at a global level, inshallah. So with these few words, I would like to thank you again for the opportunity to be part of this celebration. It's an important one to be able to look back at our roots, our heritage, but it's important to be able to learn the lessons and to be able to move forward, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum assalam. Thank you very much, Dr. Riza, or dear brother. And you know, when you mentioned that the Caribbean has so much similarities with the society where our beloved Prophet came from, it's so interesting. And we really have the opportunity today, we really have the opportunity as Muslims today to show that force in terms of unity, you know. For the younger ones, they may not remember or they may not know of 1 from 10 leaves 0, right? And you know, the black man, Stalin, say that they couldn't unite the Caribbean, but the Rasta could unite it. But I think the Muslims have the opportunity to unite that Caribbean, demonstrating our identity, you know, not a foreign identity, but that Caribbean identity as Muslim from this region. But we have so much things in common, right? And so I want to thank you, Dr. Riza. We want to open up the floor for any questions. Now we're on Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube. So those on YouTube and Facebook could drop your comments in the chat. We'll your comments or questions. And those in the Zoom, you have opportunity to ask it live. If you want, you could drop it in the chat. We'll give about 5 minutes because we really wanted to end at 8:15 for the max. So we had some technical difficulties in the starting. But that is one of the challenges with going live on technology. So the floor is open. I want to acknowledge in the audience, Dr. Nasser Mustafa. Sorry for spotlighting you, but a person of your caliber needs to be recognized in an audience such as this. So the floor is open. You could raise your hand, or can we unmute everyone? Yeah, we can unmute you. So we'll unmute everyone. Unmute everyone, Emmanuel.
The person who wants to speak, they can unmute themselves. They should be fine.
So if you want to speak, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, we'll unmute everyone.
All right. So the floor is open. Any comments, questions you may have? The floor is open.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
So here, seeing that nobody wants to say anything, I just want to make a quick observation. Now, Dr. Riza was pointing to the fact that the model presented by our beloved Prophet ﷺ was able to unite people of diverse origins, different tribes, different nationalities, and so on. And what we have, the Ummah, internationally and even locally, tends to be fragmented. Now, my view is that if we stick to the fundamentals, we will be united. But we tend to be fragmented because we get sidetracked with cultural and peripheral issues that are not very intricately associated with the fundamentals of Islam. Just to put my question in a few words, I want to know what you would suggest to us here in terms of the Islamic model. At what level could we start to build unity, starting with the Jamaats, starting with brotherhood in the Jamaat, showing interdependence, let's say, of the less well off and those who are better off, because Islam has a mechanism, right, to bring about unity through interdependence of the less able and the more fortunate ones. So, but in terms of race, ethnicity, and culture, how could the prophetic model help to unite our community, starting locally? All right, that's it. Yeah, thank you.
I can start the conversation. In terms of one of the things that we can do is that I think that we need to start talking to each other. And we need to start not just talking for talking's sake, but also talking in terms of trying to work with each other. Now, one of the things that the COVID-19 over the last 18 months has shown is that we are in the midst of a global, not just a global pandemic, but in terms of global poverty that is gripping the world now. And therefore, the amount of resources that we have is far less now than we've had prior to COVID-19. What this means is that we have to do as much as we can to be able to share our resources. And maybe to begin that process, it's important that we learn to talk to each other and communicate with each other. It's sometimes it's sad that when we line up to pray, it's so often that sometimes you see people line up to pray, and they pray next to each other, but they don't talk to each other, which is quite amazing. So we need to start speaking to each other at a local level, at an individual level, but also at a level of organizations. There is absolutely no reason why we can't speak to each other, communicate with each other, and there are things which are common between all of us. And the more things that we have in common, the more that we can use that opportunity to work with each other in terms for the betterment of everyone. And once we start to do so, I think it would really bring us together, inshallah. So that is one suggestion. And it has to be done on all levels. One of the community mosques, my local mosque here in Manchester, and this is not just with non-Muslims, but it's with Muslims, but even with non-Muslims. Like, for instance, once a year we have a annual picnic. But this annual picnic is not just with Muslims. It's with all of the Jews and all of the Christians and all of the faith communities. We all meet together and have one in one of the biggest parks that there is, that everybody meets together, bring their own food, and they share with each other. And which is something that we need to sort of encourage. What we do with local mosques is that we have activities and we move from one mosque to the next, or sometimes what we do is that the khatib in the mosque or the imams in the mosque where they deliver their khutbah from week to week is not in the same mosque, so that they rotate between a number of different mosques, maybe 6 or 8 different mosques. So you might only see the imam from your local mosque maybe once in a month, or once in 6 weeks because he is delivering his khutbah elsewhere. But by having others coming into your place of worship also sort of builds that, barrier and breaks that barrier down between you and them. So there's a whole host of things which can be done to be able to bring people together and for us to start to talk to each other. But unless we can't do so, we're always going to have difficulties. And I think this is one of the biggest problems that as a community, the Muslim community has in Trinidad, that we are so self-centered, that we often think that we have our own turf, and we are so protective of what we have, that we've lost sight of what is the real mission that and what is really that we're meant to be doing.
Thank you very much, Dr. Riza. We have another question here in the chat, and if there's no more, we could probably end on this question, but this is a very interesting question. What are the ABCs for us to engage our youth to understand and practice Islam as families and as individuals within a community? That's the gist of the question. Dr. Riza?
Yeah, I think that's a lecture on its own. but just to sort of give some ideas, I think when it comes, we need to understand, we need to appreciate that there is a problem, and there's a huge problem when it comes to youth and identity formation, and what they identify themselves at. And there's a huge problem with people on the whole who are quote unquote religious losing their faith. And this is something that many communities have not fully appreciated what is to the extent of the problem. And in some respects, as a community of religious people, we have played a part in that happening, in terms of not being able to really explain what our faith is all about to our younger generation, and therefore when they think about what Islam is, for instance, or who Muslims are, is often looked at and in the context of something which is backward, something which is archaic, something which doesn't make sense, something which is linked in some way to some form of extremism or fundamentalism or terrorism, and this type of thinking is well supported by the media and by Muslims themselves, in terms of people who claim to be Muslims who behave in some of the worst possible way in different parts of the world. And this is something which is very difficult to be able to deal with. And then the continuous bombardment of those around them, of news media, of publications which are coming out, which are just cementing a lot of those ideas. So, and with the onslaught of materialism added to all of that, in terms of the pursuit for wealth and riches and so on, which is often looked at as something which is very much against what being a good Muslim is all about. So the notion of what a good Muslim is suddenly boils down to somebody who may give up everything in this world, and sort of looking to a point where he's due to meet God and he's just about to die and that type of thing. So religion is about practicing it when you get old. And therefore, when you're young, you just sort of learn to enjoy life. So there's a huge problem going on, and this doesn't help with the fact that there is a big generation gap and communication gap between the older generation, between the younger generation. The older generation can't just seem to communicate because they don't speak the same languages. They don't share their time in the same way. What is of interest to the young is very much different from what the old people or the older ones are interested in. So there are lots of problems in terms of between the generations, and all of this is leading to Muslim youth becoming alienated, and many of them losing their faith. And therefore, we have an important role to play in this regard, to begin to instill within our young people, important creative and critical skills in terms of their thinking, the way that they look, in the way that we explain things. I had the opportunity during the course of this week to speak to some of the most educated Turkish youth, for instance, through the Ministry of Education in Turkey. And some of the key questions that they were asking related to this whole area of religion, because living in a secular state, as Turkey is, many of them have grown up looking at religion as something which is an inhibitor in their growth and progress. But in being able to change that narrative is something that we have to be able to tackle head on. And the only way that we can do so is that we ourselves have to learn to be able to fully appreciate the rationale for our faith of what we do. And when we talk to people now, we have to be, and especially our younger people, we have to be able to do so in a way that truly explains what it is, the rationale behind what it is that you do, and allow them to be able to ask their questions, to be critical, and to be open in terms of what they want to say or what they want to do. Only by doing so will we begin to be able to reach them and to be able to open that communication window with them. And this is something, and this is not something which is new I'm talking about. Even if when you go back and look into the history of the Prophet, and I'll just give you one example on this. When you look back into the history of the Prophet Muhammad and his companions, one young man came to him and said, look, I'm young, give me the opportunity to commit zina, to be able to have sexual relations with other young people. I'm not married, but I'm young, and this is what I want to do. But his attitude in dealing with that question was not one where he shunned the person, and of course those who are around him who were listening on, they would have been at the point of trying to crucify him. But the way that he was able to engage in a intelligent conversation, to be able to break down what are the real issues and how to begin to address that, is something that we need to be able to learn. So learn some of those techniques. And more of that is what we need. I mean, when you look at the statistics coming out about our I'm talking about young Muslims and the whole area of pornography, for instance. Most of you would know that when you look at the statistics, if you're talking about over 40% of young Muslims who are 14 and 15 years of age, they're addicted to pornography. They're addicted to pornography. It's there. It's something which they're seeing day in and day out. Everybody has a smartphone now. What do you think they're using the smartphone for? Is the solution simply to take away their smartphone? They'll find another means to be able to get onto things. So these are real problems, and unless they're addressed in a well thought out way, we are going to have serious problems later on.
Thank you, Dr. Riza. My dear brothers and sisters, it is 8:30 here in Trinidad, but Dr. Riza is 5 hours ahead of us. Right, so we really wanted to end at 8:15, but we'll have to end now. But before we go, I'd like to call, first I'd like to thank everybody, but I'd like to call on our sister Malaika. As in, it's very interesting that the last discourse focused so much on youth. And if you were here from the starting, you would see that we opened with a Quranic recitation from a student of the TML primary school. Then we had our Haji Hussain, Said Hussain, And Said looking very young to me. You know, I look plenty older than Said. So, and now we are ending with our young sister from the Islamic Resource Society, Malaika Hippolyte, who will deliver the vote of thanks and a closing dua. Sister Malaika.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. It is a great honor and privilege that I have the possibility to perform this vote of thanks at this momentous inaugural occasion. To begin, a special thank you to our featured speaker, Dr. Riza Muhammad. His enlightening words shall forever be in our minds as we continue to ponder about complex topics surrounding redefining the Muslim identity in the Caribbean culture. What does our identity as a Muslim mean to us? How do our cultural differences allow us to contribute to a better society and environment? Again, a thank you is given to you for sacrificing your time to speak with us tonight. To continue, a hearty thank you is given to Brother Yahya Ali for the auspicious words in the opening dua, such as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may bless us and this event. Furthermore, a warm thank you is given to Brother Kwesi Atiba for the inspiring words spoken in the opening remarks. Additionally, I would like to thank our key performer, Brother Saeed Hussain, for his both entertaining and satisfying performance. Moreover, a thank you is given to the host of this event, Brother Emtima Salwazi, keeping us intrigued and ensuring a smooth flow of this program. A special thanks is given as well to those behind the scenes who have helped make this event possible. Finally, exceptional gratitude is given to all of you who logged on to attend this event tonight, as it would not be made possible without you. Now for the closing dua. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wal-'asr. Innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa 'amilus solihati wa tawassaw bil-haqqi wa tawassaw bis-sabr. Hasbi Allahu la ilaha illa huwa alayhi tawakkaltu wa huwa rabbul 'arshil 'azim. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. O Allah, you are pure from imperfection and all praise is due to you. I bear witness that there is none worthy of worship besides you. I seek forgiveness from you and return to you. Amen.
Assalamu alaikum. And thank you, Sister Malaika Hippolyte, for your wonderful vote of thanks and closing dua. With that, we like to close off today, and we want you to know that our next lecture is Emancipation Day, right here, Zoom, YouTube, and Facebook. So thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Keep safe, observe all protocols, right? And see you all again, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.